Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the October 27th City Council work session. The first item up for discussion is the City Hall project. And just wanted to let you know that my intention is, I think there will be 3 decision points after we have the discussion, and my intention will be that we will vote on each one of those separately. All right, City Manager.
What are they?
That would be 4th floor, that would be parking, and council chambers.
Right. And each one of those has a recommended funding for those as well. And just before I turn it over to Mike and his team, I wanted to let you know on the council chambers piece, my recommendation is 2A, which is the disassemble and store option. And that really is, you might remember the conversation to date has been, do we demolish it or do we move in mothball? And I think this is a way to save and perhaps have a creative adaptive reuse at some point at a later phase, and this preserves our option for doing that at a significantly less cost than just mothballing the current chambers on site. So just wanted to let you know that 2A is my recommendation for that piece. So Mike?
Sure. I'm just going to turn it directly over to the design team. They'll speak tonight, start with John Ryle, and then Scott Wolf and Karin Knutson are here as well.
Thanks. We just have a very brief presentation to go over some background on the 3 points. Next slide. We always want to remember that we have project values and keep those in mind. And, of course, translating those to project goals that are a little more specific. Next slide. You asked us to come back with some more information on 4th floor in Phase 1, integrated parking that's below grade, and then options for the council chamber. So Scott's going to start with the 4th floor.
This diagram is the framework scenario that you saw at the July and September work sessions. It essentially consolidates Phase 1 and Phase 2 of City Hall on the east side of the block, or excuse me, the west side of the block, and reserves the east side of the block for future development. So the base budget, the current project budget for Phase 1 accommodates the 24,000 square feet, and that's illustrated in the colored diagram here. That's about 9,500 square feet on floor 1, about a 5,000 square foot mezzanine on the second level, and a full 9,500 square feet on floor 3. And you can see on the right-hand side the indication of 4-story future development on the east side of the block. And then what we're looking at now is what was depicted in the diagram, the recommendation of 4 stories. This is for a total of 33,000 square feet. This provides for 3 full floors plus the mezzanine. This is an opportunity to consolidate more city functions on the site, provide more flexibility for those functions in the future, and by doing that 4th floor now reduces the cost for providing that square footage, that additional square footage. You can see here a couple of the other benefits of thinking about the additional 4th floor. It increases the civic presence when you look at the potential larger development on the east side of the site, making sure that the building, the City Hall is not overshadowed by that future development. So 4 stories begins to fit comfortably with that future phase. And it also, if you click please, Karin, it also contributes, we think, to a very appropriate urban scale for the building on the downtown site, and it establishes a more prominent civic presence on the site with the scale of the building at 4 stories and the scale of the plaza and relationship to 8th Avenue.
So the second topic is the underground parking, and you've seen the image on the left is shows the ground level of the proposal you saw in July and in September, and then a diagram of surface parking and interim use built to city standards, to code, and a land bank for a phase 2. But we're really focusing on On the right side of the image, the idea of doing underground parking just within the footprint of the building. That gives maximum flexibility for phase 2 to the north, and easily expandable. We're talking about 17 to 20 spaces for a total cost of $1.4 million. You can see in that diagram the ramp. The idea is the ramp connecting to 7th Avenue on the east edge of that. And that leaves room for potential expansion below grade to the north as part of phase 2. And that can be coordinated with this phase 1. And then remembering that on the east half of the site, there's quite a bit of below grade parking potential.
So the third item that we wanted to discuss tonight were options thinking about the council chamber, and just a bit of context for that. That's parameters about this decision and the direction from council, that the chamber, through research and looking at options with that structure and with our team with Mackenzie Commercial, we understand that the chamber could only be moved off-site if it is disassembled, that the surrounding streets, right-of-ways, trees, existing traffic signals, all too low and too narrow for the structure to be picked up and moved from the site intact. Second piece of context for your decision would be that the chamber could be mothballed in a different location on the City Hall block, that is feasible to do, to actually pick up and move, but that all of the structure, or all of the options that we're proposing, substantially impact the structure, affect the character of the existing structure and of the chamber. And then finally, that we are moving forward with deconstruction and reclaiming materials from the existing building, and with two-part bid package out with our team, and that we need direction on these decision items by November 6th, or even tonight. So the three options for the council chamber, and this background was in your AIS. Option 1, really focusing on salvage, reclaiming valuable or useful materials from the chamber, demolishing what is remaining, and crediting the value of the recycled steel structure to the project. That would be no additional cost. Option 2, to disassemble and retain the steel structure for future reuse, adaptive reuse, as the city manager mentioned, for an additional cost of about $42,000, and we'll talk about each of these in a little more detail in a moment. And then lastly, the option to relocate and mothball the existing structure on the City Hall block for a cost of up to $400,000 to relocate that in a temporary position. So option 1, just a little bit more background, reclaiming and demolishing the structure. Very straightforward, in line with information that we have in hand, and with our construction team. We would salvage what is possible for reuse in the future with another project, and there would be no additional project cost moving in this direction. Option 2, and this is a diagram of the structural steel frame of the council chamber, would be to carefully disassemble this structure and retain it for future use. Would be salvaging existing materials and completing necessary interior abatement work, and then essentially storing the structure off-site. And the costing associated with that is about $15,000 for disassembly and about $9,000 a year, so $27,000 for up to 3 years of storage. And that's a total cost of about $42,000 additional to the project. And then lastly, the option to relocate and mothball the structure. It would mean complete interior demolition and abatement work, essentially disconnecting the steel structure and its concrete platform from the building, relocating it in a temporary position on the City Hall site. It would be set on cribbing approximately 6 feet above grade and fenced to be secure, and it would be in that position until a different use was determined and a new use was determined. The cost for that is up to $400,000, and we need to be clear that that is just the cost to temporarily relocate the structure on the City Hall site. No improvements or interim uses would be allowable with that cost expended, and we've been working with Jim Meander and Mackenzie Commercial to think about what it would cost to reuse, and it's probably $1.5 to $2.5 million to move the chamber into a reusable condition. So there would be additional costs to go in that direction.
What's cribbing?
Cribbing is essentially a stand, more or less, that you'd be setting the structure down onto so that you could pick it up again. Because this would be a temporary position. It would need to be moved again to new foundations to a permanent location. And that's the end of our summary of the 3 decision points, and we'll turn it back over for your discussion.
Okay.
Actually, I had one more thing I wanted
yes.
to add, was just that we've identified 3 funding sources to accomplish the addition of the 4th floor and the underground parking, totaling about $4.25 million. Those funding sources are $800,000 from the sale of the parking lot across the street from City Hall to the shed, which occurred last spring, $900,000 from a telecommunications settlement, and about $2.6 million from future contributions from public works funds to be paid over several future years. And a little bit more information was included in the AIS about those funding sources.
All right, so I'm going to take any questions people have about this, and then we'll move to putting the first motion on the table. Questions? Councilor Brown, and then Councilor Clark, and Councilor Taylor.
Well, I've got lots of questions, but I have some comments first. I mean, you know, we need to talk about this thing. Halloween came early to the council and the taxpayers. It's trick or treat. This, you know, for 2 years, the councilors and the taxpayers have been told that Phase 1, the administrative center, we can't really call it City Hall, but Phase 1 would cost $15 million. And now, starting on Thursday, we see a plan to bump that, essentially the first cost overrun, to bump that up by 28% to a total of $19.25 million. Surprise, surprise. I think it's fiscally irresponsible to prejudice next year's budget discussions. We haven't seen the 2016 forecast. We won't see that till January. The Budget Committee does not have a chance to weigh in on this to see if it's a wise use of taxpayers' dollars. I think it's an unwise use. We don't know what next year's requirements are going to be, and yet we're going to take $4.25 million out of, and really the money from the shed sale and the telecommunications funds are totally discretionary dollars in the general fund. It can be used to address any problem in next year's budget, any problem whatsoever. We can use that. So I guess my first question is, this plan calls for $2.5 million to come from Public Works non-general fund or funds. $2.5 million is 3.3% of Public Works, $76 million non-general funds. Where will that money come from? That's what I'd like to know. Is it going to, specifically, is it going to come from roads, airport, wastewater, stormwater, fleet services, parks? That's my question.
Yeah, Kurt.
Well, the proposal for public works funds would be from equal amounts from the road fund, stormwater fund, and wastewater fund. Over a 6-year period, those would be on the order of $145,000 per fund per year. Roughly 1 to 1.25% of those budgets. It would generally come from balance available in those funds. We would operate with a slightly less operating reserve to make that possible without reducing services. We would expect to recover that through savings on future rents.
So you said how much per year will be drawn out? How much per year?
About $145,000 per fund.
145 per fund per year. And over how many years?
We're projecting that as a 6-year.
6 years. So will this money need to be made up in next year's budget or any part of this?
No, we would just we would roll that into the forecast.
But the construction costs will have to be paid before the all that money's assembled. Is that correct, from Public Works?
If it were necessary from a cash flow basis to make that money available sooner, then the possibility of an interfund loan that would come back to the council is a possibility to put cash in place faster.
Mm-hmm. Well, is there any, you said some of it's going to come from stormwater. This leads to my next question. I mean, so are there plans to raise the stormwater fees to help cover this?
There'd not be a specific proposal to adjust rates for this piece. I think, as we've shared before, the multi-year forecast for stormwater does show annual inflationary increases.
Well, sure, we all expect that, but I'm saying this money's got to come from somewhere, and I think a tempting spot would be to just simply raise the stormwater fees. Can you go over the funds again, where the money's going to come from?
Yeah, there will be
$145,000 for
three of the dedicated funds: the road fund, wastewater, local wastewater fund, and the stormwater fund.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. If we have those, I have to say, kind of taking off on what George said, this is an issue of priorities within the larger scheme of city budgeting for me as well, at least with this fourth floor question. And if we have that manner of flexibility within Public Works funds, I would think there are other priorities that for me naturally come up as that should be discussed in a balanced way. Our inability to appropriately fund parks maintenance springs to mind. That if you asked me if this is money that's flexible within reserve, and if you ask me, is it wiser to keep it in the reserve to spend it on a new city hall or to do a better job with parks maintenance, I might be real tempted to go with the latter on that. So it gives me pause with that source. It probably makes a lot of sense, a lot of fiscal sense, to build that fourth floor as long as we're at it. We'll probably save money, and it probably makes sense. But the trouble is, as George has mentioned, we told the public this is a $15 million project to do with money we have. And I'm really uncomfortable. I'm probably a no vote on the fourth floor, because that makes me really uncomfortable to go right at the start spending more money than we said we would to begin with. I had a question about the parking. When and if we get to the day when we build a larger building on that north section of the west lot, will it be possible to put underground parking in that space or under that building? And if so, how much relative to what you've just showed us?
Yes, that's possible, and we've diagrammed out those schemes to see what would they cost conceptually, and it really depends on how many levels you build. So we've looked at up to 2 levels. But yes, the idea is retaining flexibility for that.
For me, I would think that we have, with the plan we're in, street level parking available on both the eastern side of that lot and on the northern side of what's being planned, that would suffice sufficiently until such a time as we have a larger plan, at which point we could put parking under that larger building and fold that underground parking into that larger plan. So I don't need to spend the extra money today to put parking under this initial structure. That doesn't seem like a wise choice for me. And when it comes to the other council chamber, I'm having a difficult time understanding, if we take that all apart into pieces, how that is in any way retaining for historic preservation. That piece, there are pieces inside that I think we should keep. I think the big painting behind the council dais should be lost forever, but other pieces should be kept. And as to whether or not we keep the metal beams of a structure disassembled, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me for the cost. So I'm probably a no on that as well. Thank you.
City Manager.
I just wanted to mention on the fourth floor, one of the, I think, real positives for us is there's been conversation actually quite a bit around this table that eventually some of the facilities or some of the parts of the organization that are currently leasing spaces in other parts of downtown, we would want to bring back into this particular building. And so what this really does is it allows us to do that in a less expensive way now rather than waiting at a future time, by virtue of essentially what Public Works is doing is prepaying for space on that block, and it just allows us to do it at a cheaper cost now. And so it's trying to be responsive actually to part of what we've been hearing around the table over the last couple of years. So.
Councillor Taylor?
Thank you. I will have some comments on each one, but I have some questions that are sort of mixed up here. But, well, first, I do want to make one comment now. I think there should be more opportunity for public involvement when we're discussing changing plans. 3-year storage for the chamber, if it was stored, why 3 years, and what would happen after that?
I think that was just selected as a reasonable amount of time for decision making, so that if another use could be found and somebody else was interested in it, that would give plenty of time. If at the end of 3 years we didn't have any takers, we'd have to assess what to do at that point.
So, and you're talking about making it usable, the money it would cost to make it, it's usable now, so why would it cost so much to make it usable?
It's actually not usable. I mean, it's usable in its current form for its current use, but as soon as we move forward, it will kick in various code requirements, and it will not be usable at that point. Because of code requirements around seismic resistance primarily, but also the exterior envelope doesn't come anywhere near meeting energy codes. So it would have to be completely renovated to be usable moving forward.
Unless we left it where it is.
Even if we left it where it is, because we're doing a new building around it, next to it, and so on, I don't believe we'd be able to leave it in its current state.
Okay, I'll try to stick to questions. If money had been spent for maintenance over the years, which we haven't done, it has not been the City Hall has not been maintained, what department would that money come from?
I think as we do with all our facilities maintenance, there would be there's a facilities fund in which maintenance is paid for out of that particular fund. So is that the question, or?
Yeah, what fund would it? Where would it have come? We have not maintained the building, and it would have cost money to maintain it.
I don't know what specific fund.
Well, we actually have maintained it all these years. I mean, it wouldn't be usable if we hadn't maintained it, and we followed the council direction from 2001 to maintain it at the minimum rate to keep it operational over the years, and we've done that. We've spent many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on the building in that time. Not to the same level as if we were going to continue to use it.
We've been told it's deteriorating. And if it's deteriorating.
Yes. Right. It definitely was needing some additional capital input to keep it going by the time we closed it down.
So I wondered if the extra money could come from facilities. I'm wondering why it was Public Works that you chose.
I think a couple of things. One is we don't have sort of a separate savings account for just ongoing annual facilities maintenance, because that gets budgeted every year as we go. We have had a facilities fund, which is where the capital dollars for this particular project is being used. We also thought about Public Works because they would be a future user of the site, and therefore the dollars are available. As Kurt said, what they would do is just carry a little bit smaller fund balance in their non-general fund funds to be able to fund that.
Okay, and that brings me to another question. Why would Public Works be the department that you'd want to bring back first, rather than planning, for example, which I think the public has more direct contact with?
I think what we'd want to do is bring back the parts of the departments that make the most sense operationally across the city. Planning one, they couldn't just fit in 9,000 square feet, so it wouldn't be big enough for starters. And what we've talked about is Public Works prepaying for their particular space, and then what we need to do is figure out on the block where everybody actually fits when we bring them back in.
Another question, is the use of the telecommunications money restricted? I thought it was, but I don't know.
You recall we have two different kinds of telecommunication fees and taxes. One portion goes in the general fund, one goes into the telecommunications fund. And this settlement was related to the general fund portion of telecommunications dollars.
So it isn't restricted to
No.
something related to?
No.
Thank you.
Councilor Zelenka?
I guess we're on the fourth floor issue. I guess we're at a common decision point when you're building large capital projects. Been involved in a lot of those, and you get to the point where you stop and you think, are we optimizing this plan? Should we add anything to it that would be cost effective to do now rather than later? And I guess that's the question: is this going to be cost effective to do now more than later? It's question one. Question two is, it kind of begs the question that Mike brought up, which is, what are the other opportunities for this money? Is it capital versus operational money, which it's different kinds of money that can be used for different things, and back on the what we can use, what were the opportunities? Can we get a list of what we would do if we didn't do fourth floor?
You can answer the question about being more effective or not. Part of this is the fourth floor is a capital project that is one-time money, and the monies that we're proposing are also one-time monies. And so from our perspective, any trade-offs would not be that we would recommend we use this one-time money for an ongoing expense. We've had that conversation numerous times, and so I think that from our perspective narrows it down. So one-time expenditures often are capital types of expenditures, and we could use those monies for other kinds of capital expenditures. But then it gets to, I think your first question is, do we actually save money now if we're going to build that space into the future now by spending these dollars that are available as opposed to spending them later on? And Mike, you can talk about that question.
Sure. I think the reason that we are really looking at adding the fourth floor now is because it is a lot more efficient to go upward, especially just one floor. We've already got the site work related to the footprint of the building. We're just increasing the strength of the structure just a little bit to accommodate an additional floor. There's efficiencies to adding an additional floor plate on top of a building that we're already doing. So it's less per square foot than if we were to expand horizontally, for example. And then also with the diagram that we showed, with the site diagram, a 4-story building occupies the plaza in a really nice scale. I think the architects could talk a little bit more about this, but without overwhelming the plaza, and also sets us up nicely for phase 2. And so a 4-story building just works better from a massing standpoint and a design standpoint, and there's more efficiency in adding that additional floor now vertically rather than horizontally later.
Do you have a sense of percentage cheaper to add a fourth floor as opposed to building it sometime standalone on its own?
What I figured was it's about 38% more square footage area, and it's about a 19% increase in cost.
19% increase in cost.
Could somebody repeat that in the mic so that the public can actually?
Sure. 38% increase in square footage and a 19% increase in cost.
So that's a significant savings. Okay. John, you referred to one-time money or paying forward. I guess, can you explain this again a little bit forward? This isn't money we can use for maintaining other buildings or maintaining parks. This is one-time monies?
What we're talking about is using, are you talking the fourth floor piece of that?
Yeah, well, Yes.
Kurt, do you want to address that? You're more familiar with your funds.
So I'll try maybe the question one more time so I can
So
context.
talked about one-time money or paying this forward, and so this isn't money that can be used for other things like park maintenance or other kinds of maintenance or things like that. It's not ongoing money. It's money that you said is one-time money, can only be used for instance, capital projects.
In the case of the dedicated public works funds, it is money that would otherwise be part of our overall operational budget for each of those funds. And my response was that we would carry a slightly lower reserve in those funds for that period of time in order to accommodate that and minimize service reductions. I think, adding on to what John said, if we arrive at the conclusion that at some point there would be an investment from Public Works in the City Hall phases 1 and 2 to accommodate our downtown work operations, then I think from a business standpoint, putting the $2.5 million in now versus, I think if you extrapolate the numbers later, $5 million later, I think that's how we arrive at the conclusion that putting the money in now as a pay ahead makes sense. It's to directly answer your question, it's not necessarily one-time money in those funds, but I think in the context of that, it's spending part of that budget on a one-time basis 6 times to pay ahead for the space that we're when we move in, we will then not be paying the lease rate. So
it's rental space.
Correct. Right.
Another question about underground parking. So $1.4 million for 17 to 20 spaces. If I got my math right, it's about $75,000 or more per space for underground parking. What does it cost for an above-ground parking space? You're good math.
We don't have all of that math broken out because one of the things to bear in mind with the project is that while Phase 1 is approximately a 10,000 square foot footprint, the cost estimating and the project costs that we're dealing with are for the redevelopment of the full block, which includes the demolition of the existing building, that structure, as well as the site preparation for that surrounding area. So I want to give that bit of context because it's very easy for these numbers to become quickly confusing without that piece. The question about surface parking costs versus structured, if you back out numbers for the structured parking that we have, it's probably somewhere in the vicinity of 5 to 7 times more costly for a completely below-grade structured parking space than it is for an on-grade surface parking space. And that simply has to do with the fact that you're building an enclosure and building a building on top of that. One thing to bear in mind is that the surface parking we've identified for the Phase 1 project would be a cost associated with the land bank site for the future of City Hall. So in terms of thinking about long-term parking and spaces that will remain on the site, in the long-term redevelopment direction or proposal, the subgrade spaces are the spaces that you're keeping long-term, that investment is staying long-term.
But it's only 17 to 20 spaces that we're talking about.
Yes, in that first phase footprint. Yeah.
So above ground parking is in the $10,000 to $15,000 a space. This is like $75,000 a space. Very interesting trade-off. Mike, last question. Can you elaborate more on your October 16th email you sent out about City Hall reuse and recycling, specifically the 95% goal and all the things that we're doing with all the pieces parts?
Sure. Yes. Well, as you know, we've already removed all of the cedar slats. Those are being saved. Those will be clean, resawn, and milled into various shapes and sizes for other use. The concrete pavers went to bring. We made plants available to various groups in town and use some at some of our own facilities. All the metals will be recycled, the rebar out of the concrete, the copper wiring, plumbing piping, and so on. the artwork. We have a plan for reusing all the artwork. Most of the bulk of the material is the concrete material that's on site, and so we're going to use all of the concrete structure and grind it, use it as structural fill on site. That includes also the concrete block infill walls as well. That's one of the reasons that we think we're going to be able to hit the 95% mark, is because it's a concrete building and we're using so much of it on site, and so it's a really high bar to reach, but we think we can do it.
But 95% of the building would get either recycled or reused in the project.
Correct.
Were you talking more into the mic?
Sure. And then I guess I heard that the concrete pavers are already sold.
Yes, those went to Bring, and they were sold or spoken for within the first week. There were people waiting at Bring as the trucks pulled up and taking them away, so that was a real nice success story.
Does the recycling or reuse of the art, does it include the pieces that are parts of the walls?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, okay.
In fact, the contractor has removed several of those now, and it's been an interesting engineering study to see how to get those loose. Those are, each one has a different circumstance to it, and so yeah, those are being set aside for reuse later.
Okay. Thanks.
Councilor Pryor?
Thank you. Has the price of the original Phase 1 that we've been talking about, has that changed?
Not at this time, no. As near as we know, that's still within budget, yes.
Okay, so the original Phase 1 is still costing the original amount we talked about.
Correct.
So any additional money that we're talking about now is consciously to pay for some additional element that we can, or that we may choose or not choose to put on. Correct. And if we don't choose to put it on, the price hasn't gone up. The price is still the same. So this is a conscious choice on our part if we want to add money for additional space.
Yes.
So this isn't price creep. This is a conscious addition that we may or may not choose to make in all of these elements. I think that also gets to a point about what we should be investing this one-time money in. I mean, we have had a history in the past of using one-time money to underwrite ongoing operations. So it's not as if this is a new thing for us. We've done it in the past, but we have also recognized that in many ways that is not the best way to run government, because it means each year at the budget year you're scrambling to find money to cover what should be being paid for with ongoing expense. So it's not as if it's somehow immoral to spend one-time money on ongoing expenses, but it's not good fiscal policy. It's not a good way to run a government to use one-time money to pay for ongoing. But we do have the discretion to do that if we choose. So the question for me is how to use that one-time money. We could theoretically take one-time money and we could use it to water the parks for an additional year, or to do something with the building for an additional year, or do something for an additional year. Or we could use that money to make an investment in a city hall building that will be with us for the next 50, 100 years. And so I'm thinking about what would I like to do with that one-time money. I could spend it to get us another year down the road, paying for some ongoing expense. Or I could invest it in a building that is going to be part of Eugene for the next 50 or 100 years. What, for me, is the better use of that money. And others may disagree with me, but I think if I have to make that choice, and I have the opportunity to spend that money on something of this significance, I think I'll spend the money on something of this significance and figure out a way to take care of those ongoing expenses using an ongoing source of money, and work to find an ongoing source of money, because the security and stability of those ongoing services, I think, is also a very important consideration. So it's not that we can't spend one-time money. It's which thing do we choose to spend that one-time money on? And at least for me, I choose to spend it on something of this importance and not just to keep us rolling for one more year.
So, I just want to pause here because it's 6:10 now. We have 3 parts of this conversation to have. So I am guessing, unless you tell me that this is the consolidated plan is time sensitive, that we probably won't have much time for that.
Be delayed to another night.
What we would do is make it a priority to bring it back onto your agenda. It is an important conversation to move forward, and we do want to provide information, and we're going to eventually need some good policy guidance from the council. So if we don't have enough time to maybe even start down that conversation, we'll definitely reschedule.
They have time to start. I just wanted to give everybody sort of heads up of that we still have a major bite of this conversation to get through.
And this one's an important one to land because, as I mentioned, here in the next couple of weeks, if we want to keep moving on the project, we do need the decisions.
So I'm going to ask Chris to put the first motion out in a minute. I did want to say that I think it is possible to look at the proposals before you and say that people listened, staff listened hard to much of the conversation that came before us. And one of the things we heard from a lot of people is they were interested to see if we could get more consolidation. So this has been taken into consideration. Some people said that you need a little bit more presence, a little bit more scale on the property, and you've tried to respond to that too. So whether you decide to support this or not, I think these are really honest responses to what was heard during the conversation we've had over the last few weeks. Councilor Pryor.
I move to direct the city manager to proceed with the City Hall fourth floor expansion for $2.85 million, utilizing the identified funding plan.
Second.
Moved and seconded. I've got Councilor Brown and then Councilor Clark. Councilor Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I've got a question about the sketch for the parking here. It ties into this motion. This is one half of the block, right? That's one half the footprint.
Will you talk into your mic so people can hear you, sir?
What the sketch that we have here, the schematic, represents half of the block. I'm assuming that the east portion was left out on purpose because that supposedly is where the county courthouse is going to go, or office space, or retail shops, or whatever. I am of the opinion that the county courthouse will never be sited here. And from all my conversations with people at the county and their consultants, I don't think it's going to happen. And this is the problem with this whole scheme. There's no overall plan for Phase B. There's all these moving parts, and here we are. It's the grab bag. Let's just, here comes an idea. Let's grab it and let's use that. And we don't know, for instance, how many stories the building of Phase 2 will be to move everybody back in. We don't know the configuration on the footprint. We don't know how many square feet per story to shoot for. And the parking is a huge issue. We don't know how many spaces we're going to need for a consolidated city hall. We don't know where they're going to go. We don't know if they're going to be underground or if they're going to be structured. In other words, there's really no plan, and this piecemeal approach is I believe, a very imprudent way to go about this. And so, I mean, and this talk about one-time money versus ongoing money, the money from Public Works is definitely ongoing. And if we remove 1.7 million from the funds from the general fund for next year from the Shed and Telecom, we've really severely prejudiced our flexibility in dealing with the 2016 budget. I mean, I'm thinking of all kinds of ways that money could be better spent. In my opinion, I think we're going to need a lot of money for winter homeless strategies. I think that there may be calls, to make more cuts to Human Service Commission. I mean, we really don't know. Will there be a deficit next year? We don't know. How big will it be? We don't know. And so to pre-commit all this money at this point without any public input at all, and especially no input from the Budget Committee, and without having seen the forecast, I believe it's really fiscally irresponsible and not a good way to go at all until we come up with at least a general outline that we can all agree on for Phase 2.
Thank you.
We're not anywhere close to that yet.
So, City Manager, either you or staff, I'm trying to recall, I believe the decision was made the last time we voted on here to stay on the west side of the property for the new City Hall.
That's correct.
So that vote's been done, and what was the other thing that?
You also voted, and the majority said they want to phase the project and to move forward on a phase 1 to include these particular elements. So that was also,
decisions are not part of this discussion. They're already made.
from our perspective, that's true.
Right. All right. Councilor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. John, or maybe Kurt, how much is Public Works paying out right now per year for leased space? And administrative leased space?
The public works spaces that are not owned by the city that we occupy now are Public Works admin in the Park Place building and Public Works engineering in the Wells Fargo building. I'm afraid I don't know off the top of my head the amounts of what we're paying in those leases.
No guess?
I might be off by an order of magnitude.
This is a critical point for me. I'm not trying to make I'm not trying to beat anybody up here. I mean, we're talking about, because the rationale that you used there made some sense to me. Is it wiser to rent a house or to buy one? And I think most people know it's wiser long-term to buy one. And if we're spending a lot of money in rent, and we have an opportunity to buy a house for Public Works and have it cost less money, why, that might make some sense to me, but I don't know how much we're paying in rent. So that's kind of a problem for the decision right now. John, can you help me with that at all?
I think we're trying to find that out.
Okay. I would say, though, that it's still a difficult decision, and to address something that Chris said. I don't believe that, and if I implied that these guys were raising the price on us, I really want to make sure I clearly did not mean that at all. These guys have done a fantastic job and are coming in and doing absolutely everything that we asked of them. My concern was that we kind of made a deal with the public and said we won't spend more than $15 million. And now we're considering changing our minds. And that gives me some hesitation. It's also the sense that I believe, as George has identified, and as I've said before, we're heading about this process the wrong way. With a capital expenditure of this size and a project of this impact on the city for years to come, I think the public deserves hearing from us what our larger scale vision is, what the long-term plan is before we're spending big chunks of their money. So for me, to make this decision, I'm uncomfortable not knowing the larger context of how we're going to move forward with Phase 2, how we're going to afford that, what's the plan from here. There's just no context to this decision. We're doing it piecemeal, and it's bothersome to me. So while I was initially a no there, I probably still am on that question, but it's really a tough one. Do you have the number?
Yes, I'm looking at a document online that will verify, but it appears that the annual lease payment for the Wells Fargo building is about $324,500. The annual lease in the Park Place facility for Public Works admin is about $76,500 per year.
So we're $400,000-500,000 a year. What's the
about $400,000 total for those two facilities
that we would save with the expenditure of the 2.8 out of the.
To be fair, we're investing in 9,500 square feet of floor space, and collectively these spaces are about 26,000 square feet, or about three times that much. So if you want to compare apples to apples.
Half or less of the, yeah. Okay, thank you.
And I just want to, I think people's opinions and values on this topic are their own, but for the public's sake, I wanted to point out that when we voted on this we voted on the fact that it was going to be phased in, and everybody who voted for it with the knowledge that we have not had the discussion yet about Phase 2.
Sure did.
Councilor Taylor? Oh, Surratt, I'm sorry. Surratt first and then Taylor.
Thanks. Thank you. So I think Chris was speaking to the comment that this was somehow a cost overrun, and a cost overrun is something that happens during the course of a project and you turn around and realize you've overspent on your budget. This is actually a decision asking us if we'd like to allocate additional money towards this project. It's not a cost overrun. We may decide, as Chris said, not to spend this additional money, and I'm still not certain. I do think there's value in this proposal to shell out, create the fourth floor at this point. I see that in terms of the footprint of the building, the future of bringing more office space into there. And I have to disagree a little bit also with Mike. I think actually this is exactly the kind of project where you make the big decision about the big picture and then are faced with a series of additional smaller decisions that come out of the prior work that you did and the prior discussion. So I'm not at all surprised that this council is now considering these two questions about, do we want to shell in a fourth floor? Do we want additional parking? So I'm more convinced on the fourth floor piece as being a good, efficient way to get this built now at a lower cost than it would be in the future. Kurt has identified as reducing his reserve as his strategy for prepaying for the space, so that's not taking away from services. So considering our fiscal constraints, that seems like a prudent approach to reach the goal if we want to put that fourth floor in. So I'm leaning towards voting for this motion. I'm not as convinced about the underground parking. I do recognize that there's a value to underground parking, and parking is important. But I will need to be convinced by other folks around the table if that's something that we want to do, that's the same worthy investment that I can wrap my head around this fourth floor addition at this point.
Okay, and in finishing this round with just one turn for each person, I'm going to have Councilor Taylor and then Councilor Zelenka, and then we're going to vote on this first one.
Thank you. We're not discussing parking right now, is that correct?
Just fourth floor.
Okay. Considering, I think we made a huge mistake when we decided to destroy the current building. But since the majority has decided to do that and to build this new building, and I still hope a miracle will happen, we'll change that. But if we're doing it, I think adding a fourth floor makes sense. Thank you.
Councilor Zelenka.
So this is kind of a rent versus buy decision for us, and to me, it's what are the alternative uses for the money is also part of this conversation. We do offset the $400,000 in rent, but and it's interesting that we may make this decision. It might be the smart thing to do, but we won't make the decision because it's because of the politics, even though it's fiscally prudent to do that. Some of the folks that were opponents of our path said that we really need to get rid of the rental space, and so this addresses that issue, but it's not even close to getting rid of all of our rental space. It's only, what's our total rental space? And this is that what Kurt was talking about, 95,000, and this is 26,900.
It's 95,000.
For public, is that just for public works?
Yeah, that's Public Works. I mean, we're renting, it's much larger than that.
26,000 square feet.
It's we have the Interim, which is, we own that space, but yeah, there's,
Mike's got this.
oh, I'm sorry.
72,000 square feet is currently leased elsewhere.
Total?
Yes, that's correct.
And this would be including this space that we're in?
Yes.
So it still doesn't get us anywhere near to completely putting this all back together. And it's not really one-time money. It's reducing reserves, reducing future capital, and using the telecom funds, which telecom funds is one-time money.
Yeah, I actually would argue that your savings account actually is one-time money because you have a pot of money that you can spend at once. So it's not an ongoing revenue source. So I would argue that when you draw down your reserves, you're actually drawing down one-time money.
So when it says 2.4 million expected to come from future capital projects and budget allocations, what does that mean?
Well, what Kurt mentioned, what that means is you just carry a little bit less reserve, and so you're drawing down your savings account over a 5-year or 6-year period by that total amount. So it's really it's one-time money coming out of your savings account.
So it would be used for other capital projects within Public Works that we wouldn't be doing because we'd be doing this.
Could be, or you could be, or you're just carrying a little bit less in your savings account every year, right? So,
but doesn't necessarily mean that
it's not a direct
taking things off the CIP, capital improvements project.
Correct.
Okay.
There's not that direct correlation between that. You're right. Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Link, are you finished?
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, let's vote on this. All those in favor of this motion, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In opposition, 2. It passes. Next motion.
I move to direct the city manager to proceed with construction of underground parking for $1.4 million located beneath the new city hall, utilizing the identified funding plan.
Second.
Moved and seconded. I got Councilor Brown and then Councilor Taylor.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm holding up the sketch of the footprint under discussion. And the northern area, it says potential expansion of below-grade parking. How many spaces would fit in there?
It would depend how many spaces was designed to include. So how many levels of below-grade parking were included?
Well, let's just say one level.
One level could be 50 to 65 spaces, depending on how you locate your vertical circulation elevators and stairs that must go down to that level to provide egress.
Okay, so let's just say 50 times 70,000 a square foot. That's 3.5 million for one floor, 7 million for 2 floors. Is that correct? Is my math right? 50 times 70.
Whatever the.
Well, a larger floor plate would have greater efficiency, so the cost would be a bit lower per space. Then if you want a second level, it would raise it back up again because it's more expensive to go down farther. But for the purposes of argument, yeah, that's close enough.
Okay. Yeah, well, it just kind of goes back to my point is that there's no overall plan. We have no idea what the total parking requirements are for all of the departments, and we don't know where it's going to go. If we go down 2 floors, that's $7 million right there. Of course, God only knows where the funding will come from, and that doesn't include the 4 or 5 story building up on top of it, to move everybody back. So I'm not going to support this. I think it's, there again, it's just a piecemeal approach to an overall plan that we have not even outlined in any sensible fashion, and I think it's a misuse of funds, and it'll prejudice next year's budget discussions. I won't support this. Thank you.
Councilor Taylor.
Thank you. I want to point out that we're destroying a huge amount of parking, and if it's worth the amount per space, you say it is. And we talk about saving the concrete, we're using it to destroy a very valuable resource. But I do think underground parking is important. I think that we need some kind of parking structures or underground parking instead of surface parking. But it's, why couldn't we save part of the current parking space?
Because it's not below grade.
It's halfway below grade.
Not even half, really. And that's a decision the council's, and that's a decision the council has already made previously, I believe. So.
We already made the decision not to save the parking.
Yes, because that comes with the building.
I remember when we made a decision to save the parking, but I suppose when you say when we voted for demolition, when the majority voted for demolition, that was a part of destroying the parking. Is that it? But I remember
yes,
when
that was
made a
part of
motion
those. was part of that series of decisions of a few weeks ago. So that's true.
Wrong decisions. Thank you.
Councilor Zelenka.
And that decision also saved us about over $8 million in cost of remodel versus rebuild versus build new. So $1.4 million for 17 to 20 spaces, $75,000 a space is just too expensive for me. I mean, I can see the value of underground parking in the future, and if we had gobs of money, I'd say, yeah, let's do that. But I really don't see us doing phase 2 for the next decade, so we can use that space for parking in the meanwhile and turn the other part into a park for the next decade or so. So, and I don't see us really needing to have underground parking for any particular purpose other than efficiency of space, but that has a cost to it. So I'm not in favor of the underground parking at this price tag.
Councilor Pryor.
Thank you. Since the new phase 1 is going to be built at ground level, we can't really think of this as saving 20 spaces. This is really constructing 20 essentially new spaces because we're going to have to do a number of things, going down lower and reinforcing in a different way. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. So I like the others. 1.4 million for 20 spaces seems like a lot. So I'm going to put you on the spot, but in a nice way. If you were doing this project for a commercial client in another city, and they had a similar situation, and this commercial client was toying with the idea of adding 20 underground spaces for $1.4 million in their commercial building, would you advise them to do it?
I'm on the spot.
I'll jump in because you said from another city.
Exactly.
And, I would say no. I mean, I think the discussion that you're having when you're looking at the cost per stall, it's a very difficult argument to make when you have the ability to provide parking at the surface at, 1/10 to 1/7 of the cost. So of a structured parking stall. So given that you do have the flexibility in phase 1, and in the future phase 2 likely will include subgrade parking of possible multiple levels, you can accommodate those 20 stalls in a future phase 2, we believe at a much lower cost per stall. But it comes down to a decision of whether the value of having some subgrade parking below the phase 1 is something that you would like. But that would be our recommendation to a similar client in another city.
Thank you very much.
I'll add one more piece of context to that because, of course, you're planning for long-term redevelopment on the site, and that is that in the future it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to add beneath the building. So I want to be clear that in the absence of a vertical connection from a below-grade parking associated with Phase 1, there would not be a case in which a member of the community or a member of city staff or visitors comes to this building, drives under City Hall, and comes up into the Phase 1 building. That would not be a possible future. So it's a detail, but it's one that gets lost when people are thinking about below-grade structured phased projects.
Sure. No, I appreciate that, and thank you very much for your candid answers. I mean, it really helps us a lot when you're giving us your professional opinion, and that means a lot to me. And I think having options for parking is really a liberating thing for me because it does provide us some opportunities to consider other ways of doing it. This isn't an all or nothing proposition. So from that standpoint, I think 20 spaces for 1.4 is probably not the option that would be most appealing to me, but I recognize there's probably other options, and we'll probably have a great conversation about what those other options might look like. So I do appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Councilor Evans.
I think my question was just answered, so I'm good.
Okay, we did one round on this. I'm ready to vote. All those in favor, please indicate.
Oh,
we already had a round. I was just doing one round, so I can get to the next
Right.
decision.
Sure, limit the discussion, fine. Why not?
Is there something new that you have not mentioned before?
Yes, there is.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to hold up this sketch again. Here's the west. area, that's half the footprint. That's where the new building's going to go. That's where we're talking about the underground parking. Here's the east portion. This is the portion that supposedly will contain the county courthouse. That's years off if that land swap ever happens. There's easily 100 parking spaces here with trees, with some landscaping. So, and that's all going to be filled in after the demolition. So I think that just solves our problem right there, and we don't have to worry about spending 1.4 million on 20 spaces. So I think it's makes much more sense to develop this as surface parking, and so just more sensible, I believe. Thank you.
I think we're ready to vote on this. All those in
The motion's already on the table.
All those in favor, please indicate. 1 in opposition. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It goes down. All right, next motion.
Can I ask a process question?
Sure.
So I just wanted to ask the city manager, since we've approved one piece using this phrasing of identified funding plan, and then we've not approved the parking piece, will you intend to use the one-time dollars that identified from the sale of the surplus property first before the Public Works Reserve piece?
No, the intent is to use the Public Works because they're prepaying for their space, so it's appropriate to use that. What would happen with these other dollars is you'll see them as part of your marginal beginning working capital as one-time monies, which then the council can choose to do whatever you would like to do at that point. So these other monies will come back, and that's when you'll see those.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to move the city manager's recommendation, which is I move to direct the city manager to disassemble and retain welded steel structure for 3 years to provide for reassembly at a later time at an estimated cost for disassembly and retention in storage for 3 years of $42,000.
Second.
Moved and seconded. I have a question about, is there anything within the chambers that is of value other than the steel?
There's some cedar that encloses the steel frame that was part of the drum in the middle. The voting board we've saved. We took a look at the teak plywood, and because it's glued down, it won't come up without destroying. And so we've assessed there's really not much there beyond that, but
you've looked at it pretty carefully.
We've looked at it really carefully, yes. And anything we can salvage, we will.
I've got Councilor Clark, Councilor Zelenka, Councilor Brown, Councilor Evans, Councilor Taylor, Councilor Clark.
Thank you. There are pieces to this that I'd like to see saved. Now, as far as, essentially pick up the chamber and put it over here for a while, obviously we can't do that. But there are other pieces that I don't think we need to save. So when we talk about disassemble and save all that's possible, I'm not interested in doing that. I think there are things that have been a part of this discussion that don't need saving. If the council chamber can't be saved whole as it is, the value of saving the beams to assemble later seems silly to me, because it won't look like the council chamber inside. All of the reasons for saving it go away. But I am in favor of saving some of the things that were just discussed, the pieces that we might use in another fashion. The cedar that he mentioned, some of the pieces, definitely the artwork, some of the historical things, and so forth. So I don't know how to make a motion that would split this apart or word it in a better way that I would feel comfortable with. And since we don't have a second round, I can't listen to others' thoughts and then try it then. So
we might be able to help and distinguish about what we're going to say regardless of how you vote today versus what would actually be disassembled and saved if you vote yes on this particular one.
Thank you,
Mike, you might want to.
The only thing different that we're talking about doing that we aren't already going to do as part of the evaluation and salvage process would be to retain the steel structure instead of sending it over to Schnitzer Steel or wherever to be recycled. So we will we would analyze and retain anything of value anyway. So this isn't directing us to save things that we wouldn't otherwise save. The concrete block doesn't have any value. The glass, the storefront.
If we're if we're not picking this thing up wholesale and setting it over here as a relic of the time we used to inhabit that chamber, I don't understand the value of saving the beams that no one can see right now, and that are not of practical use in the future for a structure for us that would meet code. So I'm a no vote on this as well. Thank you.
Councilor Zelenka.
So, just to be clear about what would be saved, there's the kind of the square box, and then the
picture up here.
It's that metal frame there.
So it's just the frame. I mean, the glass would be gone.
Yeah.
So the purpose of it would be then to store it somewhere, all the pieces, parts, and you can disassemble it and then reassemble it, and somebody would, either us or somebody else could use it to develop a building that would have some other purpose but would resemble existing city hall for a meeting space or something like that.
Resemble, yes. As the design teams established previously, this steel frame, it doesn't meet current code, so there would have to be a lot of extra added to it, and depends on the function and so on. So it's sort of just keeping the possibility to recreate the structure in some other use and for some other purpose.
So really, that part, taking it apart, only costs about $15,000. It's the storage part that's $9,000 a year for 3 years is $27,000.
Correct.
Why does it cost $9,000 to store it? Why wouldn't we just stick it on property that we already have?
It's steel, so if you put it outside, it's just going to rust. So that's why it needs to go into storage where it's protected from the weather.
And we don't have any
to be reused.
We don't have any space that would be cheaper.
It's possible, but we just sort of took a market rate for storage for that amount of steel. I mean, we don't have a spot that we could identify that's just waiting to be, for this to be stored in.
All our surplus capacity storage facilities. Right. So to me, this is kind of like, we've done things where we've tried to preserve our ability to preserve something, and hoping for a miracle that someone will come up with the money to do that. That's kind of what I thought we were doing and what I think we're doing with Civic Stadium, which is we're preserving that as a cost to it, that hoping that a third party will step forward or money will become available that we would be able to do something with it in the future and preserve it. So I think that's similar to this for me, the fact that really $15,000 to disassemble it and some dollars to store it. It may be $27,000, might be less than that. If someone came up with the idea in a year or two, it would be a lot less. So to me, this isn't that much money to preserve that possibility. So I'm okay with the expenditure for the potential preservation.
Councilor Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. So one option is I'm favoring option number one, just take it down, take it apart, recycle everything. We would sell the steel to, say, Schnitzer Steel. Does anyone know how much it's worth? Anyone do a rough estimate on what it's possibly worth?
We haven't done a valuation on that, sorry.
Okay, well, the reason is, and there's no reason to keep it on the present site, because once, I believe that, it's a neat structure and I like it, but when you remove the total context, when you get rid of the building itself, which actually, by the way, I've been hearing from a lot of people, and I feel this way myself, once those wooden fins were removed, that revealed a very handsome, well-proportioned building with a beautiful courtyard and a really nice council chamber. But we've already gone beyond that. And so when you get rid of the garden and the building, we've removed all context for that building on that site. And so I don't think it should stay on site. As far as taking it apart, it's kind of like, okay, we take apart the steel beams, it's kind of like Lincoln logs, and we stash them in a building somewhere and hope that somebody will want to buy them. I think that's a waste of money, really, and it's like, I think they should be recycled to Schnitzer. Unless, has the city had any conversations with anybody yet about who might be interested in buying this? Basically, they're buying steel beams. They get a discount price from the city, but if you've got a serious project, you're going to go buy new beams somewhere, And so I just don't see any value in saving. It's like put the Lego pieces in a box and wait till someone comes along. I don't know that that's going to happen, and I'm for just recycling them along with everything else.
Councilor Evans?
Too late now.
I will note that we played for time before with other projects, and I've talked to enough people in the community that have enough passion and energy around salvaging some semblance of the city council chambers that I think that within a period of time that we're looking at over the next 3 years, that there'll be some people that will come up with some creative solutions around this. This is not that much money. We're not talking about $300,000 or $400,000. We're talking about $42,000 here. And to retain some piece of our history with the framework that is there, it can be reconstructed either as part of a phase 2 portion of City Hall development, or it could be on some other piece of property within the city that could be used either for meeting space, a museum, but something that we can keep. We've had a lot of discussion around this table about retaining history, historic buildings like Civic Stadium. I voted to extend, the time clock around that, and I think that, this is a much smaller price tag to extend the clock for that city council chambers, and I think that there are people with enough gravitas in this community that they would be willing to get behind some kind of preservation effort. I'd like to extend that time clock so that we can consider having that option available to us.
Councilor Taylor?
It's like saving the bones of somebody you love. To me, I see no point in saving just the steel pieces. I would vote to save the entire council chamber, but I don't see any point to this. It's like having your dead pets stuffed or something, and then it falls apart, so you save the bones.
There's skeleton.
What an image.
It's a good one, though. It's apt.
Mr. Metaphor, you have to top that.
Yeah, really. I was going to say, brother.
Are you finished?
I'm through.
The taxidermy city council chambers.
I agree. That's a pretty
Yep.
good analogy. Yeah.
Fluffy's bones.
Hard to follow. So Councilor Brown actually asked some of my questions. So there's not really any great monetary value to the raw steel. Is that correct?
No, not a lot of value to it. No.
I agree that saving this piece out of context, what does that accomplish? But the practicality of trying to save it within context is just doesn't exist. And do we know of anyone who's actually stepped up to say, if you store this for me, I will develop a plan and capacity to do something with the structure? Has anyone?
I don't believe we've heard from anyone on that score, no.
Yeah. And I appreciate Councilor Evans' analogy to Civic, but I think it's a little bit different because in that case we did have people coming to the podium quite frequently telling us that they were going to come up with a plan. Whether that plan is going to bear fruit is still unknown, but there was, I think, a more, for me anyway, a more visible presence of people who are waiting in the wings to do something with that building than I've seen with this structure. I do see definitely a lot of folks who wanted us to keep it. We've made a different decision. And what happens after 3 years if we store it for 3 years and then nothing's done with it?
That's a good question. I'd have to revisit that in some way or another.
Yeah. So I agree it's not a huge amount of money, but I'm just not seeing that it's actually going to get used for anything. It's going to have to, if it's reconstructed, it's still going to have to be retrofitted to bring it up to code, which is part of the reason that we've decided not to keep it, is because that will change its very character. And as I've suggested before, if folks are really so enamored of this design, they can replicate it somewhere else using new materials that don't leak like a sieve and need to be retrofitted in order to meet current environmental standards. So I will probably not support this motion.
Councilor Pryor.
Thank you. If somebody were going to rebuild this structure, would it be cheaper for them to use the existing steel that's been saved as opposed to starting from scratch to build this structure again? Would there be any cost saving in using this steel to build this structure versus building it over again?
Starting from scratch with new materials would be cheaper, yes.
Starting from scratch with new materials would be cheaper?
Yes.
Okay.
Because you'd engineer it accordingly, you'd have the right size members, and you would order them to size, and then they would show up correct size, and you'd put it together, and yes, it would be cheaper. Look like that.
Well, I guess that's what I was getting at. I mean, I was sitting here staring at it and thought, okay, it's just a steel frame. And it reminded me when I visited Walla Walla a number of years ago, they have a farmer's market that they have built. And they actually invested in a large pavilion that's permanently on their farmer's market site. And it's open air. It's not like an enclosed building, but it is a steel frame that they've put a roof on. And I thought, you know, if you weren't getting overly fancy and trying to completely enclose it and make it, you know, watertight and insulated and everything else, if you're just using a steel frame and maybe covering it over so it could be incorporated into, say, some sort of a farmer's market kind of environment, would that be a useful thing to retain for that purpose? Which is kind of where my question's coming from. If you held on to it for 2 or 3 years and a farmer's market was going to be established somewhere, would it be worthwhile to say, we've got this steel frame that you could put up as part of that farmer's market that you're building, and then at some point somebody could walk into it and say, hey, you know, this used to be the city council chambers. Oh, that's an interesting little historical factoid. Is that worth $42,000 in order to be able to make that what if come true? And what I'm hearing is, no, because if you were going to do that with a farmer's market and build that kind of a thing, it would actually be cheaper to just buy the steel and build it from scratch, is what I'm hearing.
That's correct. And one of the reasons is this is a welded structure, and so it has to be cut apart, and then the pieces matched up later and re-welded and so on. It's not bolted together. And it's structurally deficient, so you have to add a bunch of steel and a bunch of reinforcement to even make this structure work in a new, even an open-air pavilion environment. So
okay, so for that play in the barn idea, it's going to be cheaper for anybody to go ahead and just build it from scratch over again. Okay.
Councilor Polling and then Councilor Evans.
Why we're rebuilding.
Thank you. You know, first of all, I want to thank everybody for the additional work they did on the information they got to us as far as the 4th floor, the underground parking, and also what we're going to do with the council chambers. I know it's kind of a last-minute job order, but, you know, everybody came through with the good information. The first two things that we voted on were pretty easy slam dunk decisions on my part. This one has I've kind of gone back and forth on it. You know, at first I said, well, let's get rid of that monster of the council chambers. And then I looked at this as, well, this is kind of a compromise for the people that want to try to save part of the old City Hall complex, the council chambers, and reuse it. But the more I hear, the more I realize that, you know, it's kind of outlived its time, and it's time to move on. And I don't see, I mean, it took us years to get somebody to come up with kind of a halfway plan that they've got to get funding for Civic Stadium, and we still don't know, and that's dragging on for God only knows how long. I don't see this doing anything better. And at this point, I say, you know, let's just go ahead and disassemble it and scrap what we can and keep what we can.
City Manager.
I just, in listening around the room, and kind of get a sense of where people are landing. I just want to remind the partly we did want to provide a different option, so I appreciate that. The other is just if there is wanting to leave the flexibility open. The Agri-Pack building is probably the most recent example where what you did choose to do is to save that, move it in, and now it will be reused by an ongoing commercial entity. And so we just wanted to provide an option that if you did want to reuse it in could be an interesting way, or maybe nobody would ever reuse it, so there's a little bit of risk at that. But
Councillor Evans.
Okay, I'm convinced. I do not want to stuff my cat when she dies. So I can let this go.
That's our new metaphor, stuffing the cat.
we will need a final option.
Oh, yeah.
I know. We have to actually vote on this, right?
And then we need to vote on what we're going to do with the council chamber.
Well, we are voting on that, aren't we?
Would you allow a second round, Mayor?
Well,
Yeah.
but then we need.
And then you have to decide a final disposition of the council chamber.
Yes.
Vote on the motion.
Yes, I know. I got
Vote on the
that.
skeleton.
Councillor Clark.
I now don't have it in front of me. Could I see the manager's first option on paper? Do you have that there? The first option on that B.
Disassemble, retain.
It's 2B.
Demolish, salvage, retain. It'd be B, right? We're voting on 2A.
2A is what...
But you can make a substitute
You can
motion.
substitute
Way is
motion
on
for
the table.
2B.
Must
It's possible there's no. I'd like to move to substitute for 2B.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Further discussion? All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. In opposition? 1. It passes. Then we're back to the main motion as amended. No, it's a substituted, right?
Back to the motion. yeah.
Yes.
I wanted to make another motion.
Okay. Go ahead.
When could I do that now?
After we vote for this one?
Yeah, after we
Right.
vote on this.
So we're back to the main motion as amended, but you can do another substitute motion.
I move to substitute C, mothball the existing chamber.
There's a second? Being no second, we're back to the main motion as amended. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and none in opposition. It passes. Thank you. Do we need anything else?
No, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Well, sorry, Stephanie.
Can you do it in 4 minutes?
4 minutes?
We'll be back.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Takeaway.
Last thoughts.